Hi, I'm Richard Davies, host of the podcast How Do We Fix It?, where we report on the people, projects, and ideas of braver angels. Listen and subscribe to our shows wherever you get your podcasts. So far, we've recorded more than 36 episodes, all about braver angels. Most are less than 30 minutes long. Again, our podcast is How Do We Fix It?, and our website is howdowefixit.me.
Elizaveta Friesem has spent years studying human suffering, and she's landed on something that cuts against almost everything we're told about our problems today. It's not them. It's not some media machine pulling strings. It's us. All of us. Caught in patterns we didn't choose and don't fully understand. Today, we get into why blame feels so good and does so little, and why nobody is ever completely powerless or completely powerful. Stick with me. Welcome back, my friends, to the D-Rate the Hate podcast. I'm your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. The D-Rate the Hate podcast is proudly produced in collaboration with Braver Angels, America's largest grassroots, cross-partisan organization working towards civic renewal. This podcast amplifies the mission that we share to foster a more respectful and united America where civic friendship thrives even when we disagree. Each week, through the power of story, conversation, and connection with incredible guests, we work to build bridges instead of barriers. Not to change minds on the issues, but to change how we see one another when we differ. Because, friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, share it with a friend, and visit braverangels.org to learn how you can get involved in the movement to bridge the partisan divide. Friends, I am so incredibly grateful that you have joined me for another powerful D-Rate the Hate episode. So let's get to it. Elizaveta Friesem writes and studies conflict, polarization, and empathy, and her book, Media is Us, starts from an idea that quietly reframes a lot of what we argue about. We talk about the media like it's some outside force doing things to us, manipulating us, running a psyop, driving wedges between us. Elizaveta's argument is that media is just another form of human communication, shaped by the same flaws and limits we all carry. It's not them, it's us. From there, we get into some of the sharpest ideas I've come across on this show. How blame quietly assumes things are about other people's power and motives that we usually can't prove. The difference between micro power and macro power, and why she says nobody is ever completely powerless or completely powerful. We close out with a simple framework she calls ACE: awareness, compassion, empathy. If you've ever felt stuck in an us versus them standoff, this conversation gives you a real way to think about your way out of it. Let's get to it with my friend, Elizaveta Friesem. Here we go. Elizaveta, welcome to the D-Rate the Hate podcast. It is so good to see you again today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, I'm glad to have you here. I've been looking over the stuff that you do, and in terms of your writing, and just the amazing thought leadership that and I would describe this as thought leadership, because there's a number of different things that I'm excited to bring from your work to the D-Rate the Hate listeners, Elizaveta, and it is stuff that aligns very well with my work in the bridge building space. But there are many things in here that takes those things to a different level. So let's get into those. And first, before we get started, I would like you to tell the DTH listeners what really sparked your interest in bridge building work, but more than the bridge building work, like the psychological part of how we relate to other people that are different than us, people that, and one of the things that we're going to get into a little bit deeper is that oppressed versus oppressor mindset and power struggles in terms of that. But what was it that initially got you interested in working on that?
Well, just to clarify, I am originally from Russia. I came here when I was already 27 years old to continue my education. I have a doctorate degree from Russia and a doctorate degree from the United States. And when I was in Russia, I was studying a lot of different things using lenses of social sciences and humanities. And I have really this interdisciplinary foundation that allows me to draw on a variety of ideas in my work. So, but to a question, how I got interested in what I'm doing right now is initially I think it was just a personal preoccupation. I think looking back at my life, I think that I've always been troubled by human suffering, and I felt that a lot of human suffering comes from people hurting each other and from disconnection. And it was just a personal thing that I noticed in myself, kind of thinking about that. And as I was doing my studies in Russia, I started kind of informally, again in my own head, exploring different ideas of explanations why that happens. And I felt like I always was trying to find something about connection. Like I felt like people can be connected, but they're disconnected, and that really that has always troubled me. My journey, how I ended up being here. But when I came here, my doctoral program in Philadelphia was in media and communication, which allowed me sort of to drill deeper into like topics about human connection, disconnection, understanding, misunderstanding in the more specific modern context. And then also when I arrived to the United States, I find myself in a different cultural environment that I started seeing some interesting things going on around culturally, politically, and I was trying to make sense of it. And after I came to the United States, I realized that the theme of empathy, the term empathy, is important for me, and I tried to figure out how it fits in my scholarship. And then just gradually, I came to the realization that I really want to study all those things and write all those things and not just, think about them in my head. So then I wrote a book. I published a book. This was 5 years ago, and I was working on it for 5 years. I had been working on it for 5 years before I published it. And that book, the title is "Media is Us: Understanding Communication and Moving Beyond Blame." You can see that. The title is that when I really, for the first time, I started working on this topic of connection and disconnection in relationship to the modern media communication.
So let's talk about that book then a little bit deeper. I want to get into that a little bit more because this is one of those things where a lot of people right now, Elizaveta, they look at the media as being this thing, this other thing, and this entity. And I'm not even saying that it's just other people, because I've actually found myself in this same mindset that the media is out there. It's this thing that's doing something to us.
Mm-hmm.
But the title of your book, and then looking at that a little bit deeper, the title is "Media is Us." So in essence, you're saying that it's not just this thing out there that's doing something to us, but the media is us. So dive into that a little bit for me, would you? Because this is one of those things where in the culture that we live in right now, and it's a very ugly mindset in my opinion, but so many people are calling these things like this is a psyop or that's a psyop, and these people are doing this to me, and we can't get ahead because this is happening. Kind of that, again, that oppressed versus oppressor mindset. But the media is us. Dive into that a bit.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We've forgotten what it feels like to have a real conversation. Social media algorithms and comment sections reward outrage over understanding. It's time to escape the feed. The week of August 10th, join all sides for a live conversation about the American dream, how we're thinking about it, and navigating the challenges. With a format designed to foster respectful dialogue, you'll hear perspectives you won't find in your feed. Your insights will be anonymized and included in a report to help leaders better understand how people see this issue. No hot takes, just real ones. Sign up today at allsides.com/derate-hate.
Well, first of all, I need to explain how I came up with the idea to write this book. So I finished my program in media and communication. And in that program, I learned a lot about current scholarship that explores media representations, and talks often about problems associated. And that scholarship was really interesting for me. I thought it's really important. My dissertation was actually about media representations of gender and teaching in high school, like how teachers were talking with students about media representations of gender. I thought it was pretty fascinating, but at the same time, I felt there was something like a nagging feeling, and that was coming from that personal aspect of my exploration of my path, to explore, to understand like human beings and society. I felt like in a lot of scholarship about media, there's this undercurrent or background or like a flavor of blame going on, right? That uh, it's often described, the situation is often described as, like media producers are manipulating because they want profit, or certain social groups take advantage of other social groups because they want to keep the status quo. Like, so I felt like I was not satisfied with those explanations and discussions, and I felt something was missing. And I realized also that all the books and articles I was reading about media, they didn't necessarily define media clearly. It was often just a list of stuff, like what is media? It's books, it's websites, it's podcasts, video games. But I felt like something was missing. So I felt like I wanted to think about like why, and you said it very well, like why do we feel that media is something outside of us, right? Then I thought, well, why is it? Media is just one of the forms we communicate, and it's governed by the same principles that have governed human communication from the moment that human beings became human beings. And in this sense, it's not just somebody out there doing bad things to us. It's just something that we are all kind of caught up in one way or another, because we're human beings and we have limitations. We have flaws. And I felt like it's not enough to talk about social problems with media in this kind of framing them through blame, even if was not directly said, like I blame this group or that person. It felt like that's what I kept feeling, right? And that's why I felt like I want to write about how it's more complicated, that it's not just somebody else, and it's not just about media, like in general, any social problem, right? Like, why is society flawed? Why do people suffer? And that's not because there's somebody like, consistently, like, and you can name that person or that social group who creates that suffering. It's because there's something about our human nature that we are stuck, and you can look into spiritual traditions like Buddhism, in the cycle of suffering.
So let's talk about that a little bit more then, because I want and I'm there was a couple things that you or a thing that you brought up there a few different times that I think needs more discussion, because I think this goes to a big part of the problem that we see today. Like I said, I keep on hearing people saying, "Oh, this is just a psyop," and these people are trying to do this to us, and it's that constant blame game, right?
Yeah.
The blame, the manipulation, or the thoughts that we're being manipulated by a particular thing. And I want to get into that because there's something there, Elizaveta, that I think needs to be kind of sussed out a bit more, because there's a way to talk about it. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to kind of minimize what people are feeling when they, kind of feel this.
Yeah.
But there's definitely something there that we need to think about in terms of how do we reclaim our agency as individuals without completely minimizing what is actually happening or what people feel is happening. How do they get that power back? Because there's something there, and I'm trying to think about this, but anyways, talk about that for me a little bit, because we as individuals need to have the agency to say, I am not going to allow this thing to happen. I'm not going to blame other people for my problems. That is actually a big part of what I talk about on this podcast, is our personal accountability, our personal responsibility to say, look, there's all these different things in the world that are happening around me that are outside of my control. It's how I choose to react to them that's going to make the difference. The media, and I do understand what you're saying, the media is just another, another medium for communications that we have had, and the media is a reflection of us. A lot of people say that about politics too, right? That our politics is us. It's not them so much as it's a reflection of who we are. And I think the media to a large degree is the same thing.
Yeah.
So how do we take those two different things and say, I'm going to reclaim my agency, or we want you as individuals to reclaim your agency, but we don't want to minimize what you're feeling in terms of that manipulation that you feel, that you are being manipulated by some great media structure that is just trying to drive us all crazy, or drive a wedge in between all of us.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate that you're bringing this angle, because that's the angle of empathy and compassion, right? So we do want to complicate the conversation, but we don't want to do it at the expense of saying to some people who are feeling angry or worried or upset, like, don't feel this way, or your feeling are not important. And also I want to say, well, if you are saying that you are suffering, that you experiencing discomforts or disadvantages in some one way or another, like you're like making it. We don't. So this is something that I've been working a lot and thinking a lot about, how to find this balance to be able to discuss society's problems, because there are certainly many, right? And discuss the fact that, yes, some people in certain situations benefit while others are at a disadvantage. There's sometimes some people certainly twist facts in order to achieve something, right? So some people harm others, and that happens. That's, we don't want to deny that. Like, how do we talk about this and without minimizing feelings of people who feel like they've been hurt? But at the same time, we do it without blaming and without and through complexity, right? Um, and that's indeed tricky. That's tricky. And I cannot say that I have like a simple formula for you that because this is part of my work, like how to formulate it, how to articulate it, how to talk about it. And that's why, so after writing that book, I felt like there's so many things that were left outside, like of my argument that I didn't get to explore. And I started thinking about writing some other books, but I felt like whatever topic I choose, still a lot gets left outside. So I realized that I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to this more traditional route. I'm going to do something that I call, and I mean, I didn't come with this up with this name, Hypertext Project. So I started one on my personal website, like a very broad, sort of like a intellectual exploration project that I named Me Looking for Meaning. And then a little later, like literally same, like a few months later, I realized that I really want to drill deeper into the concept of power that I started working on in that book. And then I created a separate project that I called Power of Meanings, Meanings of Power. And I have a separate website for that. And I write there. I write essays, and then I like build connections between them. For example, I think of something, like, for example, agency, right? So that's a responsibility. These are very important concepts, something that I have been thinking a lot about. So I might think about, like, okay, how do uh I explain, like, what are our limits of our agency and what are the possibilities of our agency? Because I think this is an important topic. And when we blame, we essentially make assumptions about other people's agency, right? We say, well, you could do differently or you can do differently, but you're choosing to do the way you're doing things, and you're using your agency for harm, right? And I
Yeah.
realize that it's a very tricky balance here because I think it's important to acknowledge how many constraints we experience as individuals, right? But at the same time, notice our agency. That's what you talked about, right? And discuss and acknowledge that we have some agency even in situations when we are indeed hurt or mistreated. There's always at least a glimpse of agency out there.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. There's a couple of things there that have my wheels just spinning. And there's a bigger thing here that I want to get to in a minute. But you said, and I think this is hugely important, so I don't want it to go missed. Is blame, is making assumptions about other people's agency or how much control they actually have. And I think
Yeah.
that's hugely important. And I might phrase it just a bit different, but when I think about that, and I think that's awesome, is when we blame somebody else for a problem, we're automatically assuming that they had the power, they had
Yeah.
some kind of control over.
Mhm.
And no doubt there are times when that is true, that people do. But I think, going back to another thing that you were talking about, and you talk about quite often, Elizaveta, is empathy and compassion. And a lot of times when we blame somebody else for something that has happened, in order for us to actually make that blame land on that person, we have to assume that they have no compassion. We have to assume and ascribe motives to that person that they may have never had. And a lot of times we do that without proof, and I think it's unfair in that struggle. When we're looking for a way to explain something, that age-old question, right? Why do bad things happen to good people? What is the concept? What is the genesis of human suffering? All these different things. Well, a lot of times we're looking for somebody to blame, but when we look for somebody to blame and we start pointing fingers, we have to assume that person had some kind of bad motives, or that they even had the power to do that thing in the first place. Or a lot of times we have to grant that person power in our mind that person never had. I think that's huge, which kind of leads me to what I want to talk about now, because it's another thing that you talk about is this power struggle, and power is not like this rigid binary thing. There's micro power, there's macro power. When you talk about I want you to talk about it, because I think the listeners need to really understand what micro power and macro power are, because I think it ties to the agency, it ties to the empathy. It really has a lot to do with the blaming thing. Talk about micro and macro power, Elizaveta.
Sure. So as I was writing that book, Media is Us, Understanding Communication and Moving Beyond Blame, that's when I realized that I really need to talk about power. That's because, like you said, when we blame somebody, we make assumptions about what power they have over the situation. And then I started thinking, well, how do I explain this? And because when we look at a specific relationship at a specific moment of time, we often can see something that we would call power in this relationship. So, for example, a parent and a child. Right? So a parent says, well, you need to eat breakfast, you need to eat, and the child might need to comply, because in this particular relationship, at least in this particular moment, this is where power is directed, right? And that's what I call micropower, because basically what I'm saying that I'm not denying that power relationships and power inequalities exist, but we can see them more clearly, or with most clarity, when we look at the very specific relationship, a specific even situation, almost like a snapshot, right? Because why am I calling it like specific snapshot in time? Because if you take, for example, the same parent and child and look at the situation a few years later, the child is a teenager, is not listening to it, or the child is grown up and the parent is old in a wheelchair, power relationship changes in many different ways. So there's difference over time, but also what is different. Or what is important to consider is what happens when we started zooming out of this micro relationship in this specific moment, and starting including other relationship. Because, for example, the parent is not absolutely powerful, right, in any sort of sense, right? The parent is, for example, has a job, right, and then that job there is a boss, and then the parent is embedded in a community that runs by certain rules within a country, different systems. And so and the more you zoom out and the more people you include, the harder it becomes to say with absolute certainty that this person or that group of people have like power in the situation. It's just becomes really complicated. And that's what I call macro power. Is like this plane of social reality where everybody's in some way or another connected to everybody else. And you can even look at it over space and over time. And if we look at social reality, at the situation, at the social reality, in this very, very broad perspective, then we can see that power and powerlessness in every person are intertwined in some way or another. And that's what this idea I worked on later in the project Power of Meanings of Power. The idea that power and powerlessness are intertwined. As nobody is absolutely powerless, or absolutely powerful, even though in specific situations, in specific relationships, we can say that, oh, this person is powerful or this person is powerless. So that's kind of, I'm trying to combine this two contradictory ideas. Like in the chapter where I initially introduced this idea, I called it paradoxes of power, right? Because it's
Paradox
paradoxical.
of power.
Because we don't have to say, we look at somebody like who has a lot of power to like make decisions that affect other people and say like and kind of deny that, right? We don't want to say that they don't have power. Of course, they have power. But also, if we look at this we take this really broad perspective, we start noticing that they also there's a degree of powerlessness even in such a person.
Yeah. I think that's a fascinating idea that nobody is all powerful and nobody is completely powerless, and there's a paradox of power. I like the way that sounds. We've talked about a lot of things here already, and going back to many of the things that I've talked about over the course of my time doing this work, Elizaveta, the importance of agency and understanding our agency and empathy and finding ways to work through the things that where we feel we've been done wrong by somebody or some situation. But working through that without just immediately going to blame somebody else. And there's one that, as we round out our time here, there's one thing I want to talk about real quick is solutions-based problem solving is what I really love to do. And one of the things that I always want to, try and bring to the listeners if I can. And was it, I don't know. Is it in Media Is Us that where you've talked about, or it might be on the meanings of power? There's a ACE model? Is that right?
Yeah, that was a part of Media Is Us. That's in that book. I talked about that model.
Okay, so let's talk about that as we round out our last little bit of time here. I think there's already plenty for the listeners to take away in terms of how to think about things, but just that, whether it be the ACE model or that one last thing that you want listeners to take away from this this conversation, and then we'll obviously give out the websites again, the meaningsofpower.com and ElizavethaFriesem.com, but talk about that for me, Regina.
All right. So ACE, well, A in this abbreviation stands for awareness. C stands for collaboration, and E stands for empathy. If you go to my official website, ElizavethaFriesem.com, on top of it says that my guiding vision is to help people move, like use awareness about social problems to make society a better place through empathy, or to collaborate on overcoming these problems through empathy and compassion. I don't remember exactly what it says, but these ideas are crucial for me, like those terms: awareness, empathy, compassion, and collaboration. Because well, first of all, I think it's important to be aware that society has problems, right? I don't want to deny that. I don't want to argue if somebody says, well, that's problems. I say, yes, these are problems and we want to work on them. But then the question is, how do we work on them? You think that we should work on them together, right? And that's where the importance of overcoming the divide is, right? So because I think everybody's perspective is limited, right? Whoever thinks that they know everything about a problem, like they don't know everything, right? You can always learn, and you can always incorporate more complexity, and learning comes from hearing other people's stories and other people's perspectives, and that we can do only when we use empathy and compassion, which are closely related terms. Empathy is basically our ability to sort of feel the way the other person is feeling, or understand the world the way they see it. And compassion is more about seeing other people as human beings,
Yes.
even when we disagree with them, even if they cause some harm and suffering. So I think that this is what I've been working with like the last few years is that how do we find a balance between talking about problems, keeping in mind the different problems, not ignoring that, but doing it in a way that would allow us to work together
Mm.
and find solutions together. And that's why what I'm doing the work that I'm doing, because I think, I do believe in those things. I do believe in the importance of compassion and connection sort of intuitively, but I think there is a scientific explanation to why those things are actually is a rational response and a rational cause of action. And that's what I'm working on. I'm bringing a variety of disciplines and theories, and it's an ongoing project. It's growing in all different directions. And I'm trying to explain this like it does make a lot of sense. And then a lot of different disciplines, a lot of scholars talk about that without necessarily using words like polarization of power, but there's a lot of evidence as how society is complicated and we're kind of caught like we are all caught in different um, patterns and meanings that we didn't choose and we didn't create and we don't know how they work. There are a lot of constraints that everybody experiences, and how do we acknowledge that while also acknowledging problems and listening to each other? So that's what I've been working on.
No, and that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I mean, there's so much to take away here that people can think about, but yeah, the reality is or what I'm taking away, Elizaveta, is the power is not just this binary thing. It's this I love that the paradox of power, and nobody's completely powerless and nobody's all powerful, and through compassion and connection and collaboration, none of us can do this alone, and we have to realize that there's a whole lot of us out here that we're not going to agree on everything, but as long as we see each other as our fellow human beings and try to work through our differences in some meaningful way, and don't pretend that everything has to be a power struggle, we can get through our differences, and we can work through them, not in spite of them, but maybe even at times because of the differences that we bring to the table, and finding synergistic solutions to our common cause problems. So, Elizaveta, this has been a fantastic conversation. I love the work that you're doing, and I just encourage everybody to check this out. The two websites, obviously, we've talked about them before, and the different things that you can find on them. But meaningsofpower.com is one, and then Elizaveta Friesem.com is the other. Both those websites will be in the show notes, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. We really are better together, so please take a moment to visit braverangels.org and consider joining the movement towards civic renewal and bridging our political divides. This is Wilk wrapping up for the week, saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make every day the day that you want it to be. With that, my friends, I'm going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.